Hello guys, new video for you all. If you want the new part of this work, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. The story begins. Now, the main character, Han-Hu, was at school when a local bully was bothering him. Jang-bin stood in front of his desk, calling him a brat, and exclaimed that he was really tired of living. How dare he argue with him? He always gets what he wants. If Han-Hu doesn't give up his divine power points voluntarily, Jang-bin swore to destroy his divine realm. This Jang-bin is an arrogant school bully who was mistakenly gifted by the heavens with incredible power. His divine realm contains the power of an army of 5,000. Han-Hu responded by exclaiming that Jang-bin could try if he dared. And this weakling was the protagonist, Han-Hu, or rather, the guy in whose body he now found himself, having grown up with the lowest level representative, a grasshopper. And here the question arises, why would a weakling like him dare to respond to a powerful idiot unjustly gifted by fate? It all started yesterday. He arrived in this marvelous world where anyone can become a god, just yesterday. But when he got here, he found himself in the body of a pathetic, spineless wretch who, on his 18th birthday, awakened the realm of the gods with the representative of grasshoppers. When he visited his grandfather in the hospital, the grandfather said that his parents were lost in the chaotic sea of stars of the Imperial Academy, but should still be alive. He was almost certain of that. If they had the chance, they should try to find them. A girl named Qin Shuang also started bothering him, saying that if he was willing to become her slave and feed her thunder gods with his grasshoppers every day, she would guarantee that he would graduate from school and get a high school diploma. She told him to carefully consider her offer. It is a world where every person has the chance to become a god according to their level of divine power. People here are divided into demigods, true gods, elders, and superior gods. Every person, upon reaching the age of 18, can awaken the realm of the gods and find their irreplaceable representative. There is also a ranking system among the representatives. The more talented a person is, the greater the potential of their representative, which will allow them to develop to the highest level. Will the main character, a man who awakened the divine realm but got a low-level representative, a worthless grasshopper, be able to rewrite his destiny under these circumstances? Meanwhile, the school bully Jang-bin began extorting divine power points from him, threatening to destroy his divine realm. Apparently, the difficulty of this game had been raised to hell mode from the start. His only representatives were grasshoppers, and with that, he wouldn't be able to enter the Imperial Academy, let alone find his parents. He approached the capsule saying he needed to deal with this annoying Jang-bin first. He wasn't going to stand by and watch his life be ruined. He entered the capsule and put on the helmet, thinking that since he was in this world, he should at least try to fix the situation he found himself in. Simply giving up would disrespect what had brought him here. The system informed him that the connection to the divine realm had begun. He successfully connected, and his eyes widened as he saw green fields and mountains in front of him. He looked down in surprise and saw grasshoppers. Were these his representatives? A bunch of grasshoppers resting in the grass? A window of stats opened in front of him, displaying information about him and his divine realm. He had a unique talent called Hidden Son of Heaven, and also had the divine ability to accelerate growth and sacrifice life. Currently, he had 1 divinity point and 0 divine power points. The power of faith was at 200, and his god's sphere level was at the first stage. In his sphere, there were 800,000 adult grasshoppers, 160,000 juveniles, and 20 million eggs. The protagonist thought and said that if he believed the memories of this body, then before, he had neither the talent of heaven's chosen son, nor the ability to sacrifice life. So, these appeared after his transfer. He opened the description of the talents. The description of heaven's chosen son said that he was a person chosen by the heavens themselves and was extremely lucky. For each level reached, he would receive an ability. Sacrifice of life was an ability that allowed him to sacrifice the life of a creature once per day and receive a value point equal to the life value of that creature. The product itself is generated randomly after the life sacrifice. The main character looked at the first talent and said, "This must be his trick, the one he got when he was transferred to this world." But the exclusive ability to sacrifice life was likely something he received because he became a divine being. That's not bad at all. Maybe with these tricks he can still fulfill his grandfather's last wish, but that's only if he can survive tomorrow's encounter with Jang-bin. He thoughtfully looked at the representative description window and saw that the grasshoppers had the talent for reproduction. Their level of faith was fantastic, and they obeyed the orders of their god. There are 3 classifications of believers: devoted, fanatics, and saints. He could obtain 1 point of faith per day, reproduction rate, 300 individuals per day. The life cycle was 90 days, 15 days in the egg stage, 15 days in the juvenile stage, 45 days in the adult stage, and 15 days in the mature adult stage. Han Hu thought his representatives had the talent for reproduction, and their life cycle was 90 days. He could accelerate their growth using the life sacrifice talent. 1 day in the real world is equal to 100 days in the realm of gods, meaning that in 1 day in the real world, several generations of grasshoppers would have time to change. He realized this and said that he would have to take a big risk. If he won, he would become a master instantly. If he lost, he would lose everything and become completely inoperative. The next morning, he went to school, and Qin Shuang entered the classroom. She immediately approached the protagonist's seat and asked if he had thought about her offer. Was he ready to become her slave? If he accepted the offer, she promised that no one would lay a finger on him until the end of the school year. He replied that he refused. Surprised by his answer, she exclaimed, "Did you understand what you just said? Without my protection, you'll be eaten alive." He responded that maybe she was right, that he would indeed be eaten alive before he could get out of here. But he still preferred to refuse. Even the weak like him had some dignity. He really appreciated the fact that she cared so much about him, but he had already made up his mind. If she had nothing more to say, she could leave. She turned and walked away from his seat with displeasure, saying in the end that he would regret his decision. After that, he sighed heavily, and Zhang Bin and his friends immediately approached him, asking if he had gathered the 100 divine power points they demanded from him. Another guy demanded that he hand over the points quickly, but suddenly, Zhang Bin put his hand on Han Hu's shoulder and angrily told him to hold up. The bully, irritated, asked if he was really tired of living. How dare he argue with him? If he didn't voluntarily give up his divine power points, then he promised to destroy his divine sphere. Han Hu frowned and told him to try if he dared. Hearing that, Zhang Bin was confused and wondered in surprise what was wrong with him today. Normally, Han Hu was afraid to even lift his head, but now this? He glanced at Qin Shuang, thinking that she definitely wasn't doing anything here. His friends started preparing for a fight, and one of them said he had never seen what it was like when a divine sphere was destroyed. Another guy said happily that his grasshoppers had greatly reduced his average strength. They said that Zhang Bin's orc army was among the top 60 representatives in the school, and they were curious to see it. Zhang Bin smiled and pulled out a card from his inner pocket, telling Han Hu not to say later that he didn't give him a chance. He had chosen death himself. Too bad for wasting 10 power points on trash like him. He used an invasion card that cost 10 divine power points. It generates a portal between realms through which you can invade the enemy's realm. The protagonist got nervous and then gasped loudly, feeling himself sucked into the portal. A second later, he found himself in a rocky area and saw a massive gate in front of him. He asked, "What is this?" The gate opened, and behind it appeared many silhouettes with glowing red eyes. They were Zhang Bin's orcs. Meanwhile, he himself was floating in the sky in the form of a deity and ordered his subjects to crush the pale Gavano army of his enemy and destroy the world of his divine realm. The orcs clenched their fists and rose, shouting loudly. Meanwhile, everyone outside was watching the live broadcast. One of them said it looked like the orc army had increased by at least another 1,000. He thinks that now he's at least among the top 50 in the school. Another guy asked in surprise, "What top 50 is he talking about? Doesn't he see that each of his orcs is armed with an iron weapon? They are already among the top 30. Another guy told them to look, as there was some kind of common creature in front of his army. Dior, one of the disciples, was surprised and said that he already had a common creature now, huh? No chance in hell. Qin Shuang, who was in the crowd, sighed in displeasure. And meanwhile, the protagonist summoned self-detonating locusts and ordered them to attack his enemies. Meanwhile, the disciples saw that the locusts had acquired a different color. One of them asked, "What kind of red insect is that? Are locusts supposed to be like that?" One of them said in surprise that it was a self-detonating locust, but he only had common insects in the divine realm. When did he manage to do that? And in such a large number? The guy next to him asked, "So what if they're elite? They're still locusts, and they still don't stand a chance against the Z, so they shouldn't rely too much on that trash." Meanwhile, the orcs charged to attack, and the locusts ran toward them. After the collision, the insects exploded, and a huge column of flames rose to the sky. The protagonist looked at this with a smile. The day before, he used his ability, leaving 1 million adults to reproduce and the rest to be sacrificed. The locusts were immediately burned in the sacrificial fire, which rose to the sky like a tornado, and the system informed him of several options for what he could obtain. Option 1, he could get 10,000 goblin warriors once. That's a common creature. Option 2, The fountain of life produces life-giving water that better nourishes his creatures and has a beneficial effect on the environment of his divine realm. Option 3. The first level sacred artifact, the Heart of Explosion. After placing the heart in his divine realm, there's a certain chance that individuals with the ability to cause explosions will be born among his representatives. Looking at the first option, he thought it was a very tempting offer. Thanks to that option, he would be able to easily deal with tomorrow's problems. However, that's a one-time summoning, so in the end, he'd still be the same weakling. The Fountain of Life would help his representatives evolve into stronger creatures. However, that would take time, and the battle was tomorrow, so it wouldn't be suitable for him. He chose the third option. It would be more suitable for him. The reward effect was directed at his main representatives, so it wouldn't disappear after some time. Of course, if he were lucky and everything went right, a red crystal would appear in his hand, which he would immediately crush and then throw an insect with all his strength, causing an explosion. Looking at the raging flames, he was happy and thought he had been lucky. The orcs survived the explosion, but if he increased their number, something might go right. He needed to experiment with this. However, the protagonist summoned the locust again and sent the insects to the enemy. Meanwhile, Qin Shuang smiled and said the situation had become a little more interesting. Seeing the locust approaching inevitably, the orc froze in place. At the same time, his deity ordered the surviving orcs to quickly return to his divine realm. Han Hu smiled and asked, did he decide to flee? But it was too much. He stretched out his hand and ordered his representatives to catch him. If necessary, invade Zhang Bin's realm. A huge swarm of locusts flew through the gate, and several powerful explosions could be heard. Zhang Bin called the master of the gods with displeasure and told him to immediately order his insects to leave his realm. Meanwhile, the locusts exploded the Orak, and Zhang Bin said he admitted defeat, so he should remove his insects from his domain and leave his orcs. Why is that? Pai Hul asked. Didn't he threaten to destroy your domain? He thinks it would be fair if he destroyed his realm in retaliation. His opponent got nervous and said he didn't dare. If he did, his parents would destroy him. His father was a demigod, and his mother would become a demigoddess, so there was no way he could deal with him. The protagonist didn't let him speak and ordered the locusts to destroy his sphere. They couldn't contain themselves. The insects flew toward the gate, and Zhang Bin, in tears, asked the protagonist to stop. He had lost. He promised never to bother him again and to fulfill all his conditions. The protagonist replied that he didn't want anything from him. He just wanted him to suffer the fate he intended to give him. Suddenly, a stern male voice sounded behind him, telling him to stop. It was Professor Lu Litian, who ordered Han Hu to stop and said that he had already won, so there was no reason to go so far. Zhang Bin called the professor and begged him to stop this madman, but the protagonist didn't listen and didn't stop the locusts. Meanwhile, they began to invade Zhang Bin's divine realm. At that moment, Zhang Bin himself felt pain and asked the professor for help. After that, Professor Lu called Hu and told him not to pretend he hadn't heard him. He replied that he had heard perfectly well, so he asked him a question. What are you doing here? He replied that he was the professor of his class, responsible for him, so it was natural for him to decide to stop this madness. The protagonist said he had another question for him. Where were you when Zhang Bin and the others bullied him and extorted divine points from him? Why didn't you intervene? Lu Letian thought he was a real fool for not understanding this. Would he expose himself for trash like him? Zhang Bin's parents were demigods. He replied that they would talk about it after he stopped doing that. The protagonist said he had one last question for him. If it were you in Zhang Bin's place, would you have intervened in the fight? The professor was confused and remained silent, and Hu, accepting the answer, said he thought so. His locusts exploded the core inside the divine realm, and the internal portal began to collapse. Zhang Bin screamed loudly. Meanwhile, the protagonist turned to the professor and asked him to leave his domain immediately. The live broadcast had ended, and all the students were shocked by what had happened. Zhang Bin, sitting on the ground, cursed softly and said he really had done it. At that moment, the classroom professor entered the room and ordered Rule to come to him immediately. Not seeing him in the classroom, he exclaimed, "Where is that insolent man?" One of the students replied that he seemed to have gone home. The professor clenched his fist in anger and said he would definitely. Inside the sphere of the protagonist god, he found himself in the middle of a desert field and said it was time to take stock. A system window appeared in front of him, informing him of the number of his representatives. Now in his sphere, There are 18.19 self-detonating locusts and 4.50643 ordinary individuals. Seeing this, the protagonist decided he would have to start creating individuals as they would still be useful to him. Now he will attach the fragment of Zangbin's divine sphere core that he received after the battle to his core. A red crystal appeared above his hand and began the connection, after which the area of his divine sphere increased to 260 kilometers. The fertile lands are 100 kilometers, the mines 20, the forests 40, the deserts 60, and the mountains 40. He also received the second-level divine city core of the first-level sacred artifact, the hammer. He now has 820 orcs and several pieces of iron equipment. Who said that this wasn't bad? It would be enough for him to last until graduation. He remembered what his enemy had said about his parents and thought he wouldn't be able to handle the situation if two demigods attacked him simultaneously. Judging by Professor Liu's behavior, the school wouldn't protect him, so he would have to rely on his own strength. He decided to trade the iron hammer, thinking that maybe someone could offer something more useful in return. A second later, a system notification appeared in front of him, and he asked, "So quickly?" The system informed him that someone had responded to his trade request. He was offered a flaming lava crystal. He said these crystals seemed to increase the representative's resistance to fire and could also enhance the power of the explosion. He agreed to the trade, saying this would significantly strengthen his locusts. After that, a red crystal floated above him in the air, and a new type of locust called the magma locust appeared. The power of faith is 1/5 and 1 point per day. They reproduce up to 20 individuals per day, and their lifespan is 250 days. The protagonist picked up a locust from the ground, tossed it aside, and, upon seeing a strong explosion, said that now the explosive power of these babies could be compared to a hand grenade. The magma also flies far from the explosion, and the damage and destruction radius are impressive. He could consider that he now had a bunch of fragmentation grenades. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang, Zangbin's father, went to the deputy director's office and said, displeased, that his son's divine sphere core had been destroyed and could not be restored in any way, and the school still hadn't given him an explanation. The deputy director, named Sumi, said that, as far as she knew, the one invading another student's divine sphere was his son, who had been bullying some students for a long time. He didn't want to hear it and asked angrily, so she was saying that his son was the only one to blame for this? So neither the school nor the teachers had anything to do with it, right? His wife said she thought the student who destroyed their son's core should be punished. The school should at least expel him. Meanwhile, the protagonist decided to use his growth acceleration ability to create as many magma locusts as possible. But before he could do anything, Deputy Director Sumi called him, and he frowned, thinking that this was to be expected. He answered the call, and she said she needed to talk to him about something. Recently, his classmate Zangbin's parents had visited and demanded that he be expelled. She remembered the conversation they'd had earlier when the student's mother furiously demanded the protagonist's expulsion. The delegate responded that, as she had said before, they had already discovered that Zangbin was the one who provoked the conflict and invaded Hull's divine realm. He had to accept that challenge. It was just self-defense, so they had no reason to expel him. The lady exclaimed that the school would continue to cover up the idiot who destroyed her own classmate's divine realm. Delegate Sumi calmly replied that she seemed to be missing something. Hull had always been an obedient and diligent student, and they had irrefutable evidence of her son's bullying. The lady told her to stop saying such nonsense, just say whether they expelled him or not. Sumi apologized and said they hadn't expelled him. Zhenggang said he could accept that the school wouldn't expel the student, but as a father, he couldn't let things go like this. If they didn't grant him a small request, he wouldn't care about the school's reputation anymore. After telling Han Hu about this conversation, she said that in the end, Zangbin's father proposed sending a detachment of 1,000 of his representatives against him. He didn't care about the outcome of the invasion of his divine realm. He said it would calm him down. He's sorry, but that's all their school can do. He wouldn't make big concessions, but she wanted to warn him that even one representative of a demigod is a terrifying force. The strength of his representatives is comparable to 50,000 relatively strong high school representatives. Could he handle it? The protagonist thanked her for her help and said he would go to school tomorrow to resolve everything. After ending the call, he said that apparently, one explosive locust wouldn't be enough for him. He'd have to speed things up. After that, he used the sacrifice ability again and took 4,000 lives. A powerful explosion occurred in his divine sphere, after which he was offered 3 options. He could get a first-level sacred artifact, a bloodshot demonic eye. After absorbing it through the divine sphere core, there would be a certain chance of the birth of representatives with a bloodshot eye. The bloodshot eye enhances the user's dynamic vision, sees blood, and enters a berserker state. In the second option, he could get a first-level crystal, a fireball. After absorbing the crystal through the god sphere core, there would be a certain chance of the birth of representatives with the initial fireball ability. If a hero-type representative is born, they could master the highest fireball technique. In the third option, he could obtain the Windsword Emperor, a heroic type of Windsword representative. After examining all the options, he said that for so many lives, this was very good. He chose the third option, and then an old man appeared before him who was the Windsword Emperor. He has the first-level basic ability Whirlwind, the second-level Fury, the third-level Storm Slash, and the fifth-level Iron Sword Style. The last ability was created by him, and it's impossible to estimate. The degree of faith is fanatic, and the power of faith is 500,000 points per day. His life expectancy is 800 years, and he's already lived for 150. The Emperor addressed her as a respected god and said he needed a sword. He replied that this wasn't a problem, then opened a trade network with the thought that since he had done nothing but speed up the reproduction of his locusts in the last 2 days, they had started giving him 100 million faith power per day. In the end, it started gathering at one point and transforming into divine power points. Considering the points he received for selling surplus land, he reached 54 divine power points. In the trade network, he began examining various weapons and noticed the Whirlwind Sword. Equipment is divided into 4 categories: common equipment made of pure matter without energy infusion, sacred equipment, true masterpieces created from rare materials using the power of faith, usually having some effects, divine power equipment. In the process of forging this equipment, divine power crystals were used to temper it. Often this type of equipment has its own soul, which is developed on its own, and divine equipment items, which represent the power and authority of the gods. Naturally, only those gods themselves could master them. He bought the sacred equipment, the Whirlwind Sword, and gave it to the old man to try. The old man swung it several times, releasing a shockwave outward, then turned to the god and said he needed 3 more swords like that to unleash his true power. The main character was even more surprised, thinking that equaled 150 points of divine power. Did he think those points grew on trees? But tomorrow, he would have to fight against Zhangang's army of 1,000 men, and demigods should not be underestimated. He still had to try his luck. With these thoughts, he opened the system window to contact someone. Meanwhile, Qin Shuang meditated in her divine realm, ignoring the birds circling around her and landing on her body as she was deeply focused. She remembered a moment from her childhood when she fell into the river, and Rule came running to her rescue. After pulling her to the shore, he gave her artificial respiration, and thanks to that, she woke up. Because of these thoughts, she couldn't continue meditating, opened her eyes, and said he was an idiot. He would die from his own stupidity. Her grandfather was a true god, and there were 23 demigods in her family. With her protection, he had nothing to fear. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of her, informing her that Hull was calling. She answered the call and asked if he had changed his mind and decided to become her slave after all. He replied that he only wanted to borrow some divine power from her. She asked if it could be borrowed and how he would repay the debt with his trashy representatives. He shouldn't think he had become much stronger just because he defeated Zangbin. His self-destructive locusts barely met the criteria for an elite creature and had little value. He told her to forget about it, said goodbye, and ended the call. She held her head, wondering why such sarcastic words had come out of her mouth again. It wasn't what she meant at all. She was sure he had misunderstood everything. Now she called him back, and he asked what the problem was. She crossed her arms under her chest and, with a displeased expression, asked how much he needed to borrow. "Give me your account number," she said. After that, the main character bought the missing weapon, and the Emperor armed himself with 4 swords at once. The protagonist called him in displeasure and said he spent all his savings on it and even went into debt. He would have to work all that off. The next day he went to school, and his classmates were surprised, asking if he wasn't afraid the demigod army would trample his divine sphere. Another disciple laughed and said he must be completely crazy. His friend agreed and said they'd see if he could stay calm when the demigod army started destroying his realm. After hearing them talk about him, Hu thought it seemed like everyone expected him to fail, but that wasn't surprising. Qin Shuang approached him and asked if he had borrowed her divine power points, hoping to compete with the demigod. She advised him not to waste his strength. Even the army of 1,000 demigods wasn't something he could handle at the moment. He closed his eyes smiled, and said he had no other choice. She replied that it was nonsense. He did have another choice. If he agreed to become her slave, she would ask her family to calm that gang down. His family had only one demigod, while hers had a true god and 23 demigods. He wouldn't dare disobey her. He stepped away from her, saying he appreciated her concern, but that his answer wouldn't change. He sat down at his desk, ending the conversation by saying he needed to prepare for the battle. After that, she walked away from him, and his classmate began insulting him, asking why Qin Shuang was so concerned about that trash. He was definitely going to die today. Soon, the teacher entered the classroom with Zhang Bin's parents and stood behind the teacher's desk, pointing a finger at Hamu. The woman furiously called him a freak, exclaiming how he dared to invade her son's divine realm. Her husband grabbed her shoulders, asking her to calm down. There was no need to break their agreement with the school. The teacher, with disdain, told his student to stand up and not keep Zhang Gang waiting. He smiled and replied that he preferred to wait for the delegate. Some Lulatian started getting irritated and asked if he thought the delegate had nothing better to do. Just him as a spectator of this battle is enough, so stop acting like you're something special, he added. At that moment, the vice principal entered the classroom and asked what all the noise was about. He immediately calmed down, scratched his neck, and apologized for bothering her with such a trivial matter. He was just trying to teach the students some useful lessons. She crossed her arms over her chest and, with disdain, reminded him that he was a teacher first and not a demigod's lapdog. Was that clear to him? Zhang Gang said that since Delegate Su was already there, it was time to begin. Sumi turned to Hul and asked if he was ready. He confirmed her words with a confident smile. Then Zhang Gang pulled out an invasion card and said they would begin. The protagonist was teleported to another space and immediately saw thousands of red-eyed wolves emerging from the portal before him. A huge werewolf was leading the army. Meanwhile, the students were watching all of this from the outside. One of them told the others to look. The entire wolf cavalry was composed of elite creatures, and the army leader seemed to be someone beyond elite. The wolf cavalry was a combination of green orcs and wild wolves, and they were all equipped with high-quality gear. Hu didn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang's army stopped in front of the protagonist and lined up. He himself said that he would make him pay for what he did to his son, even if he didn't think he could leave alive. Sumi, in turn, seemed very surprised, thinking that the wolf cavalry was composed of two types of representatives, but an orc rider and a wolf from the divine realm counted as a single enemy unit. Clearly, there were more than 1,000 of them. He's so cunning, she thought. Jung also noticed this and told her it was a trap. His army had 2,000 representatives. At that moment, Zhang Gang ordered his cavalry to attack, and thousands of wolves charged. The protagonist unleashed his locusts to face them. One of the disciples said that he had almost 7 million elite locusts. Another asked, didn't he have only around 20,000 yesterday? How did he get 7 million in one day? Even for locusts with accelerated reproduction, that was a terrifying number. The man beside him said that even the weakest elite creatures, if they had enough numbers, could become a formidable force. But the bad luck was that the battle was set for the next day. These 7 million won't do anything against the wolf cavalry, he added. Meanwhile, the orcs mounted on wolves entered the battle, and when they collided with the locusts, everything started to explode. One of his students said that he had already used many of his self-detonating locusts, but the wolves and orcs didn't care at all. They came out with only minor injuries. One of the students noticed something behind him and asked, "What is that?" Meanwhile, black smoke clouds started to appear above the wolves, and then magma locusts flew over under the protagonist's command. The wolves and orcs froze in place, unsure what to do, and growled as the locusts collided with them, triggering many explosions. The students exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" The explosive power of this species is significantly greater than that of common self-detonating locusts, and they also spray lava. This is also a type of elite creature. Sume turned to the students and asked if any of them had sensory abilities. Can anyone see information about this species? One of them confirmed her words and used his ability to say that his assessment showed it was a magma locust, a type of elite creature. Upon hearing this, the vice principal was very pleased, and Zhang Gang, meanwhile, told Hu not to dream that some insects could destroy his wolf cavalry. He ordered his subjects to use all their strength, and the werewolf leading the army roared loudly. After that, all the wolves began howling at his command, releasing an icy mist on the enemy that began to contain the explosions, and soon calmed the fire. One of the disciples said, "A demigod is a demigod. He cannot be defeated by such tricks. Even elite types of creatures without gods have a wide range of abilities and capabilities." Another disciple said that Hu had less than 500,000 self-detonating locusts left, and the magma ones were completely depleted. Meanwhile, Zhenggang said he was showing him what despair was when he reached his sphere. He would be expelled from the school and thus would no longer have any patrons to protect him from his wrath. His army rushed to attack and ordered them to destroy his corporation. Ignoring the protagonist, the wolves ran past him and headed for his sphere. Realizing this was the end, Sume looked down in disappointment, and Qinshuang stepped away. But suddenly, someone told them to look at Ramul's sphere. There was someone standing there. She immediately turned her attention to the live broadcast. Meanwhile, an old man was standing next to the huge crystal, facing the wolf cavalry. He remained confident in place and did not move, ready to fight. One of the students said he was holding whirlwind swords in his hands, one of which was worth 50 divine power points. Someone else, surprised, said that equals 200 points. Where did he get that much? He thought Hu was an orphan. And what kind of creature is that? Sume replied with a smile. This is a representative of the wind sword race. These creatures below the elite type are not born. What kind of creature is this? Sume responded with a smile. This is a representative of the wind sword race. Such creatures below the elite type are not born. The disciple asked, does this change anything? Sanggan also has a lot of unusual types and also has a wolf captain whose strength is even slightly superior to what unusual types can have. The captain can deal with this wind sword, and at this moment the rest of the wolves and orcs will simply go to destroy the kingdom of God. Of Hu, he remained silent, and thought that without a doubt he was right. But the power fluctuations emitted by the wind sword did not resemble those emitted by elite-type creatures. Most likely, it was a hero. Meanwhile, Sanggan looked surprised at the Sword Emperor, thinking that he had trained for decades and still could only raise a hero-type creature, and this kid had already done it. Now he was just a high school graduate. How could he have a hero? He ordered his army to capture it but not kill it. He would take this creature for himself, destroy the boy's core, and turn him into a hero. The old man's eyes gleamed. Meanwhile, he let out a dissatisfied sigh. The orcs mounted on wolves had already managed to approach him and were shouting loudly, but the Sword Emperor quickly repelled the attack using the 3rd-level Stormcut skill, swinging 2 pairs of hands, and easily killed them with his other skills. Suddenly, one of the orcs shouted loudly, releasing an icy wind from his mouth that froze the feet of the Emperor. After that, the orc raised his sword, indicating that it was time to attack, and the wolves charged toward the wind sword. Meanwhile, he raised his 4 hands to the sky and used the iron sword style. A glow began to emanate from his swords, swirling in a vortex of wind above his head, which then intensified several times and attacked, emitting a powerful shockwave from himself. Meanwhile, the disciples were very surprised, and one of them said that it was too much. The battlefield fell silent, and the old man looked at the wolf's corpse before him, and Hungan cursed loudly and ordered the wolf cavalry general to raze this place to the ground. Upon hearing the order, the werewolf headed towards the core of the kingdom of Hu, already preparing to attack. But suddenly the voice of the director was heard, asking the demigod if he really thought to go back on his word. Hearing this, Sangji looked at him surprised, and then responded emotionally that it was not so, that he wouldn't dare. He waved his hand and ordered the wolf cavalry to retreat. The director then turned his gaze to the student from his school who was being protected by the Sword Emperor and said that it was not bad. Thus, the battle ended, and the protagonist returned to the real world. The vice principal said that he had done well, but should not relax just because he was lucky enough to have a hero life form. He should not think that heroes are invincible. With his current level, it will even be difficult for him to enter the top 3. He ignored her and told her that he had to ask for a small favor. She asked what was wrong. He responded with a serious expression that he wanted to change classes. His teacher was very surprised and nervously waved her hands, saying that she admitted she hadn't dedicated much time to him in the past. But that would change from now on. He would do everything possible to make it one of the best, and naturally, he would ensure that he gets all the resources he needs to develop, that he gives him another chance. He smiled nervously and thought that if he kept developing at the same pace, without a doubt, he could enter some prestigious academy, maybe even compete for a spot in the superior academy. In that case, as a teacher, he would be generously rewarded. He can't miss such an opportunity, but the protagonist remained inflexible and kept saying that he wanted to change class. Sume frowned with displeasure and replied that he couldn't change class just like that because there were many school rules. However, if he really wanted it, he could try to pass the exam that the school itself prepared. If he passed it, he could change class immediately. He accepted, after which Insang abruptly stood up from her seat and told the sheriff's assistant that she also wanted to change class and that she was willing to take the exam. Lulian became nervous and told her that if she wasn't satisfied with something in her studies, she could tell her teacher. that there was no need to act so hastily. They could talk about it after class. She responded that she had no complaints, she just wanted to change class. A guy named S. Xiaolong, who was sitting next to her, raised his hand and said that he would also like to take the exam. The teacher called him angrily and exclaimed that he was the class monitor. Why had he suddenly decided to change class? He answered that he was grateful for all these years of teaching, but had good reasons for doing so. He looked at Yuan with a loving gaze and thought that he would follow her and one day she would definitely be his. The vice principal said that tomorrow they would have everything ready. He headed to the exit and asked Professor Liu to follow him. Time passed. The sun was already starting to set. Hu went out and Inan followed him, asking where he had gotten the heroic-type creature from. He replied that it had nothing to do with her. She exclaimed that it wasn't like that he owed her 150 divine power points, and if he couldn't pay it back, he would be her slave. Therefore, she had the right to know where he had gotten the hero. He said he would pay her. He could even give her 5 points as interest right now, but he wouldn't tell her anything about the hero. That wasn't how it worked. After these words, he moved to his god sphere, and she, looking at the portal that appeared, cursed loudly. Meanwhile, MC was already inside and was looking at how many representatives he had. He had 100 million ordinary locusts, 1 million auto detail, a great army. In a couple of days, tomorrow's test would be difficult for him. The Sword Emperor appeared in front of him and said that the White Wolves and the Riders were hiding in the mines of his world. He should get rid of them. He frowned, thinking that he knew some of the wolves. Valeria hadn't had time to escape with Sangang and was hiding somewhere in his divine kingdom. They couldn't be left alive. They might start destroying his other representatives. However, it would be a waste to simply kill them. He ordered them to be captured, but not killed, as he needed them alive. Upon hearing the order, he went to look for them, and after 2 hours, he dragged them before their god. After looking at them, he decided to sacrifice 24 wolves and 1 billion ordinary locusts, after which a tornado swirled around him. The system gave him 3 options to choose from: an alpha mechanism, a level artifact, or a foundry furnace blueprint that allows the creation of a great furnace capable of producing sacred-type equipment. He also got 3 observation towers that provide visibility and prevent sudden enemy attacks. MC said that the alpha mechanism is, of course, good, but would he be able to control it through his brainless locust? And a furnace? How would the locust do anything with it? An observation tower? What could he see from such a low height? Among the 3 options, none seemed worthwhile. He remembered he had a couple of 100 orcs left after defeating San Pin, and wondered what they were doing now. Opening his eyes, he activated the Hawk's Eye and saw what the orcs were doing. They were digging more and building a city. Seeing that the deity was watching them, they thanked him for giving them a wonderful life. After that, Angu remembered that after the victory, he had ordered them to pay attention to the clan, and said that apparently, this clan was originally predisposed to Axtron Minor and creating something. Sang spat on all this and made ordinary warriors out of them. He kept watching and said they really had a talent for this. Maybe he could turn them into equipment makers, and then the furnace would be useful. He put the structure in front of them and told them he would give them a foundry furnace and hoped they would live up to his expectations. The orcs were very happy and exclaimed that God had given them a furnace that would not let him down. Meanwhile, the school teachers called a meeting. Professor Lul Letian addressed his colleagues and told them he believed they all knew that the school was going to hold promotion tests to another class for Ang, Wien Swan, and Sang Chalong. The school entrusted them with preparing the exams. What did they think about it? One of the teachers asked what there was to think about. They are very grateful for such a gift. After all, 3 of the best students in their class will attend one at a time. The teacher said it with displeasure. Elodidad directly doesn't care about the type of tests they prepare for Yuang and Salom, but demands that the difficulty of the test for An be raised to the maximum. They must punish the student who does not respect his teacher in some way. He has never contradicted them and has supported them in everything, so he asks them to yield to him this time while he waits for an answer. He thinks his almost got eaten alive yesterday because of the sudden transfer of these 3 has caused the performance of their class during the semester to drop significantly. So, they are forced to put Angu in their place. The other teachers accepted his proposal, saying they would never forgive themselves if they couldn't thank him for his kindness. The day of the exam arrived, and all the students gathered in the classroom. He handed out exams to 3 of them. Xiaolong received a level 1 test. He must defend himself from one intruder. Yuang received the same, but Angu was clearly surprised by his task. To move to another class, he must defend himself from 10,000 intruders. It's a level 10 test. Sume asked the teacher if he didn't think he was being too partial with the student. He replied that it was a decision made by all the teachers, not a personal one. The protagonist said everything was fine. The teacher only wanted him to show his skills to the new teacher. He stepped aside, and his teacher, annoyed, told him not to be so sure of himself. Jin Swang approached his old friend and told him that his offer still stood. If he agreed to become his slave, no one else at the school would dare to bully him. He thanked him for his concern and told him they would see each other after the tests. She frowned with displeasure and told him he was ungrateful. Meanwhile, Xiaolong smiled contentedly and mentally told Hu that he was an idiot, that he was digging his own grave. The test soon began. An army of goblins appeared before the protagonist, God, and the students watching this asked, "Can you see it?" Hu's ability is far greater than those two. Another student asked, "Who asked him to anger the teacher? Now he is paying for his pride." Meanwhile, the MC cursed aloud and began cursing Professor Liu, saying that there are red goblins with excellent fire resistance, and there are many of them. Lu Litian, for his part, smiled contentedly and said it was his own fault for turning his back on him. An army of 10,000 red goblins would simply sweep through his barricades and quickly reach his core. One of the battle's observers congratulated him. The MC cursed loudly and began cursing Professor Liu, saying that there are red goblins with excellent fire resistance, and there are many of them. Lu Letian, for his part, smiled with satisfaction and said it was his own fault for turning his back. An army of 10,000 red goblins would simply sweep through his locusts and quickly reach his core. One of the battle's observers congratulated him in advance for his victory, and he replied that it wasn't a victory, but a useful lesson. There can be no enmity between teachers and students. Hu would soon understand this for himself. Sume, without taking her eyes off the screen with concern, encouraged Hu and meanwhile ordered her army to attack. Seeing this, the goblins touched their chests, igniting fire in their hands, and then swung them, launching fireballs. When the fireballs collided, they began to explode, and Angu thought that ordinary locusts weren't affected at all. Realizing this, he ordered the locusts to self-destruct. They were frightened to see the insects quickly approaching them. After this, many explosions occurred, killing 400 red goblins. At that moment, Xiaolong and Yuang stepped out of the capsules, and one of the students told the others to look as they had already finished their tests. Yineng turned to the deputy and told her that it seemed like Angu was going to have a hard time this time. He thought he knew it. In the end, locusts are still trash locusts compared to other representatives. As much as the bombs kept coming, they still couldn't compare to the others. Meanwhile, the magma locusts entered the battle, managing to kill 3,000 red goblins with shrapnel explosions, but the rest were already at his core. One of the disciples said that this time he was definitely finished. Not even his hero could take on 6,000 red goblins at once. Jin Swang became worried and said that it was madness. The red goblins were going to destroy his divine core. Sumai contacted MC and told him to simply admit defeat. There was nothing shameful in it. He fought with dignity, and she was sure he would be able to master this test in time. He confidently replied that he had already made his decision and that she couldn't tell him otherwise. He would fight until his last representative. Besides, he had not lost yet. At that moment, the Sword Emperor used his Storm Slash and swung his sword several times, releasing a shockwave. But the monsters screamed loudly in response and raised their hands to the sky, releasing many currents of flames and directed them directly towards the old man. Many explosions occurred, and one of the disciples said that even a hero has a hard time, that they should look at this. Hu is definitely finished. The emperor found himself under incessant fire, and it was difficult for him to resist. Upon seeing this, Master Lu rejoiced and told him that this would be his last lesson for him, that he should remember it well because soon he would be left without his divine sphere. The guy next to him, surprised, told him to look at the screen. Meanwhile, an army of orcs arrived on the battlefield. One of them raised an axe and shouted that they would protect their god. Upon seeing them, the goblins were very frightened, after which the main orc ordered to kill them, and his brothers rushed into battle. One of the students asked, surprised, "That orc?" By chance, the one next to him asked, "Where did he get so much talent from? At this rate, he will be among the top 10 by the end of the year." At that moment, the orcs finally dealt with all the goblins, and Angu was very happy, saying that they had worked hard. Yuang and the vice director rejoiced in their victory, and Master Liu clenched his... He transferred to his class and told him that he would provide him with a very formidable army of orcs. Xiaolong ignored them and turned his gaze towards his lover, thinking that wherever she goes, he would go too. Angu turned to Deputy Chief Su and asked if he could find out why his exam was more difficult than the others. He replied that all the teachers collaborated to set the difficulty of the exams. Apparently, more of them thought that this level of difficulty was appropriate. The protagonist smiled and asked, "So you can see the list of those who voted." He handed over the decision of the Council of Teachers and the teachers who voted in favor of increasing the difficulty. He realized that Angu would not choose them now and began to curse Luletian. Finding those who voted against Angu, he thanked them for it and asked if he could find out what he could expect from transferring to their classes. One of them said that today he had clearly demonstrated his ability to strengthen orc creatures, so he decided that if he joined his class, he would provide him with an army of orcs of at least 10,000 individuals. With such a formidable army, he would be among the top 10 in his school in no time. After this, he could even think about entering a good academy. The second teacher, named Tian, said that he believed that the main thing for each of them was to improve and strengthen their main representatives. He had several special methods at hand that could be useful to enhance insectivore types. If he joined his class, he would help him achieve the appearance of all kinds of locusts. Upon hearing this, MC immediately made a decision and said that he would like to join his class. After him, Inan wanted to join his class, and then Xiaolong also wanted to join. Tian was very happy and thought that at this rate, he would become the best teacher of the year. 3 talented students at once decided to switch to his class. It couldn't be better. He handed them the construction cards and said that they were small gifts. Angu looked at the second-level building card, the Hive, which occupies 1 square kilometer and produces 1 million insects per year. The effect assumes all the effects applied to his other insectoid representatives. The protagonist was delighted and thought that this card was literally made for him. If he places the Hive in his god sphere, the insects born will immediately receive the effects of the explosion heart and the burning lava crystal. It turns out that this card will allow him to obtain 1 million magma locusts per year. As a sign of gratitude, he bowed to the teacher and said that he shouldn't rush to thank him, but should better demonstrate his gratitude with good results. After this, Z addressed the other teachers and told them that he believed that with this, they could consider today's test concluded. However, he wanted to remind them that in a week, there would be important exams, whose success would determine the proportion of resources distributed among the classes that best prepared their students. After some time, Anguya was in his god kingdom. Currently, in his kingdom, there were 2,040,000 common locusts, 5,000 magma locusts, multiplying the magma locusts to the maximum and improving the other types. Finally, he realized that some red orcs had appeared in his kingdom and suddenly rose into the air, deciding that he had to see it with his own eyes. He flew to the place where the red orc was at that moment and saw the description of this creature. It is a type of elite creature that evolved from ordinary orcs after a bloody battle. The creature has a talent for forging and burning blood. The level of faith is fanatic, providing 20,000 faith power per day. Reproduction, 1 individual per year. The life cycle is 80 years, 5 of which are childhood, 10 years of youth, 55 years of maturity, and 10 years of old age. The talent for forging increases the level of understanding in the field of smithing, and burning blood significantly increases resistance to high temperatures and facilitates the development of skills related to the fire attribute. After reading the description, MC thought, so the orcs themselves were able to evolve into an elite type of creature? This is simply incredible. It would be great if they became his main representatives. In that case, he could use the ability of acceleration of their growth and significantly increasing their number. 4 days later, he finally waited for the ordinary locust to reproduce until they reached 7,300,000 individuals and said this should be enough. It was time to begin his favorite sacrifice. Having swirled the locusts into a fiery tornado, he sacrificed their lives and received a reward for it. After taking a quick look at the proposed options, he felt very happy. The first option gives him a broken second-level sacred artifact, the Law of Gluttony. The main representatives of the divine realm receive the ability of gluttony. As soon as the energy they consume increases by 10,000 times, they evolve into creatures of the type above. The artifact breaks and works only on the ordinary type of creatures. The second option is the hero template. The creature that received the template works up to the heroic type of creatures. The third option gives a bit of divinity. The protagonist's eyes light up with admiration, and he says they are wonderful options. His eyes are already wide open. The Law of Gluttony will be able to turn all his normal locusts into elite creatures, but now he himself does not have enough locusts to evolve. The hero template sounds much better compared to the first option. The heroic type of creature has tremendous power. A little bit of divinity is about 100 billion points of faith, or 1,000,000 points of divine power. It's like winning the lottery. He chose the first option, saying that he doesn't need to be too greedy. He needs to start using all the potential of his primary representatives. He doesn't have many ordinary locusts left, so he will first have to cultivate them with ore. 3 days later, when he entered his god's sphere, he was very surprised and said he never would have thought that his locusts could grow to such enormous sizes. Approaching the insect that had grown to the size of a horse, he baptized it as Magma Locus. Plus, sometime later in school, before he could even sit in his seat, Inung approached him with her favorite question. She would like to become his slave. She didn't have the support of a rich family nor the necessary resources. At this pace, it would be difficult for her to stand out, even among the children of demigods. He had improved his locusts well, but they would soon reach their limit. They had too little potential. He understood that his orcs were also good, but in the end, they were not his primary representatives. He replied that he still appreciated her concern, but to stop asking him the same question. She sighed in disgust during the exam and said that he was so stubborn, after which she began to say something to him furiously, while Zovan observed her attentively and clenched his teeth, mentally telling Angu that one day he would make him disappear from her beloved sight. Their teacher told them that this exam is very important for all of them, as the results will determine if their class will receive the school's resources and equipment. So, he asked them to give it their all. The school has in its hands sacred artifacts, additional lands for their kingdoms, fragments of courses, legions of various creatures, and other useful materials. However, they will only receive them if they get good results in the exam. Now, he asked them to familiarize themselves with the rules of the exam. The exam consists of 2 phases, the selection phase and the classification phase. In the selection stage, all students undergo tests of the same difficulty level. Those who manage to pass it receive a point and move on to the next phase, while those who cannot will be expelled. After completing the first stage, the students who pass the second stage can choose to either reject or accept the classification test. The second stage consists of defending themselves from endless waves of invaders, advancing towards their kingdom of God. With each expulsion, their class will gain a point, and their personal ranking will increase. Angu asked, "Do they expel people from the school immediately? That's quite cruel, so the rewards must be really worth it." Then the rewards are shown. The students who are in the top 100 are given a random card from the land of basic resources for their realm, worth 100 points of divine power. If the student is among the top 50, they will receive a first-level sacred artifact. And if they are among the top 30, they will receive a reproduction card, which allows them to increase the reproduction speed of creatures by 5 times for a duration of 10 years within the realm. If the student is among the top 20, they will receive a first-level building called a temple, which spreads a first-level sacred aura in a radius of 100 meters, accelerating the recovery of wounded creatures. If the student is in the top 10, they will receive a divine weapon worth up to 100,000 points of divine power, with the weapon style chosen by the students themselves. If the student is in the top 5, they will receive an elite seed, which allows Subin to sense the power of an elite type, increasing the propensity to evolve into an elite type. The students in the top 3 will receive an additional level for their core, and the one in first place will receive a point of divinity. Angu was very happy and said that for a reward like that, he could do anything. After that, their teacher said that the exam was about to start. The first stage is about to begin, so they should prepare for the test. The countdown began, and when the time ran out, Angu teleported to the realm of the gods, and in front of his army, ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Seeing the lizard-headed monsters in front of him, he exclaimed that they were demonic golems. Isn't that too much for the first stage? Although they are considered normal types of creatures, their strength is close to elites. Hard scales, strong limbs. This monster is not an easy opponent, but fortunately, they are too slow. He pointed his hand forward and ordered 50,000 locusts. A rain of fire from the locusts fell upon the golems, who screamed loudly, and the protagonist laughed and said it smelled like he was at a barbecue. He wondered if he could feed them to the locusts. He called the red orc blacksmiths and ordered them to drag their bodies here. After 10 minutes, the locusts ate the monsters, leaving only their bones, and the protagonist asked what else he could feed them. It was no longer a matter of an exin, but of takeout food. He hoped everything would continue in the same spirit. Meanwhile, the teachers were watching the exams. The discontented teacher said that another student had been expelled from the exam, and he had high hopes for him. Professor Tien said that 20 students from his class had already been expelled, almost a third of the whole class. His colleagues said things were even worse in their classes. Half of them had already passed. They believed the school had gone a bit too far in raising the level of difficulty of the exam. Zai said that today, their director and his assistants were fighting against the abyssal invader demons at the border. She thought he had his reasons for choosing demonic golems as the students' opponents for today's exam. It wasn't typical of demigods to talk about such things. At one point, Tian saw his student on the screen and happily said that he had had a good idea. His locusts had just begun to devour those demonic golems, and it seemed to be going well. Had they ever heard of creatures that could simply eat the flesh of demons, ignoring their toxins? Another teacher asked, surprised, if they ignored the toxins that demons' bodies contained. He had never heard of such a thing, and it was urgent to study it. Lulian asked what was so strange about it. The fact that they were immune to toxins didn't change the fact that the locusts were trash in terms of strength and power. It was just luck. His colleague replied that luck was also part of strength, so he shouldn't forget it. This type of locust that Angu had raised was very strong and useful. He should see for himself. The locusts had already become a type of elite creature, and in terms of potential, they were at the bottom of the list of creatures that could evolve from a normal type to an elite type. Master Liu told him not to make him laugh. These creatures weren't even comparable to normal goblins in terms of strength. Master Tien said he felt he was being too biased.